Today we're talking about an interesting number, which is 92%. And according to ContactBabel's latest research, service calls are now taking 92% longer than they did in 2004. And the reason is, of course, complexity. So we see that AI is absorbing the simple interactions and agents are left with more harder to resolve queries. And what we see is that these queries take more time to solve. So, of course, the calls are getting longer, and sometimes they also require a lot more empathy from the agent side. We call this thing now as the hard call tax, and we want to explore what it means for workforce management. So, hi, everyone. I'm Zainab Ahmed, Marketing Manager at Peopleware, and I'm joined today by Dan Smitley, WFM Expert, founder of 23 Consulting, and one of ICMI's top 25 thought leaders. We're delighted to have you here today, Dan.
No, thanks for inviting me. I'm always happy to have a chat. Been looking forward to this one.
So let's just jump in. Casting is usually where we start talking about the WFM cycle. And when we talk about this trend, the hard call text, a lot of people immediately assume that, this requires to rethink forecasting from the ground up. In your perspective, is that really the case, or do the fundamentals still hold?
I think the fundamentals is reshaping it from the ground up. And so what I mean by that is I think when we're talking about forecasting, we're constantly iterating. At least like a mature forecasting process is constantly thinking about, okay, now what's changed? Now what's changed? Now what's changed? Even if the environment isn't all that volatile, we're still constantly considering that. So the introduction into self-service, to chatbots, to AI, does it require us to consider how we should be changing our forecasting? Absolutely, 100%. But that is the process that we've always gone through. If it wasn't these things, it would be marketing. It's doing something different. How do we adjust to that? The product is changing. How do we adjust to that? So I think the answer is yes to both and no to both. Like, yeah, like the foundations are solid, but the foundation is ever changing. But the approach, the consideration of what is the historical, how do we think the future may be similar or different, and then how do we hold that all together in some sort of a meaningful guess? That's what we've always done. And I think the hard call tax isn't changing that process. It just changes some of the variables we're considering.
So when you say that it's just changing some of the variables, and I agree with you there that forecasting has always been very open to, okay, so the changes that are happening, so it's always been very volatile. But what we see now is that whenever it's about AI, and when we bring in that, okay, AI is handling the self-service, basically like they're taking the simple interactions, and you cannot really predict the longer AHTs. Obviously, it requires people to kind of rethink forecasting, but how are they rethinking it in general, like in the market space now? Have you seen them kind of overbuild the solutions?
Yeah, it's another question that I like it, and there's a lot of nuance to the answer. So, are people over engineering forecasting? Are we overcomplicating things? Absolutely. But again, I think I've seen that pattern for a while. Workforce management looks different depending upon the team, the maturity of the team, the maturity of the process, even just the maturity of the CX environment that they're supporting. It's completely appropriate to have a spreadsheet in some environments. It's completely appropriate to have like a spreadsheet plus a scheduling engine or a full right? So there are variations. And so when we're getting into the AI environment, is it possible that we are now over engineering it, over complicating it, and trying to make it something that it doesn't need to be? Absolutely. I think that's a real possibility. The question isn't, does the WFM platforms out there produce too many bells and whistles people don't use? Like, that's for sure. We see that all the time. The question I think becomes, how do the platforms, how do y'all and any other WFM player make it so that it's approachable, make it so that it's kind of a little bit more customized, a little bit more personal to the individual organization? To be honest, I lost my thread of what else I wanted to say, but I could think that basically answers the question, which is yes, we are over engineering it. But I don't think that's new. I think we have been doing that for a while.
So Dan, then lead me to my next question, which is, now that we're seeing this trend that the calls are getting longer and harder to handle, do we think that that also requires us to rethink our shrinkage and occupancy targets, or do the traditional ones that we've been using for years still hold? I mean, if the agents are having to take hard calls back to back, does that change it?
I hope so. I hope so. I want it to. I'll say it that way. Again, I think the muscle that we're talking about, which is the same from question 1 into question 2, it's the same muscle, just looking a little bit differently. The muscle being something has changed. How do we respond? Something has changed. How do we respond? That is a consistent process and pattern inside of good WFM teams. And so what we're talking about is, cool, something has happened. AHT is longer. Calls are harder. What do we need to do about it? Now, I think there are some school of thoughts that say, no, like agents are agents. People are people. Like they needed 6% shrinkage for breaks. They still get 6% shrinkage. That's a reasonable amount of time. And so they're going to just firm up and say, no, we're not going to change things. I hope we're having a conversation that looks not at the data points to say, well, if we give them 2 15-minute paid breaks, that's 6.25% of the day, and that's the shrinkage, or whatever the math is. I'm hoping that we look at the people, that we're considering the complexities and put ourselves in those shoes to say, how would I need to show up differently? How might I need more breaks and more breathing rooms, and thinking through how shrinkage might be adjusting, how occupancy at this rate, back to back to back, would burn me out. That's one thing I'd hope that we'd consider. And the other thing I'd hope we consider is, it's a bigger macro trend that's really hard to quantify, but things like, how is like the concept of work-life balance changing some of the conversations? How are the younger generations coming into the workforce changing some of the conversation? So when we're talking through, well, how much should we assume from like a shrinkage perspective of paid time off? My perspective, my young adult kids and teenagers want more time off than I did at their age. And I think that's fine, but it's a reality that I think as a WFM professionals, we need to respond to. That forcing our agents to adhere to the same level of occupancy or adherence or shrinkage that has been true for the past, I think leads to greater burnout and leads to higher attrition. So my hope to the answer, or to the question, should we reconsider these variables and should we reconsider occupancy and shrinkage? Yes, I hope we are, and I hope we accommodate the person, not just forecast the math and the data.
That's really interesting, because I also remember, as you say it, from the report that we did, and you collaborated with our State of the WFM report. And you also mentioned something there which was really interesting about the younger generation now coming in as agents in the contact centers, and how they view the work differently. And it's easier for them to be disengaged because they're not as motivated as the previous generations at that point that they used to be. And I think it's an absolutely valid argument that, I mean, shrinkage and occupancy, they need to change in how we look at the workforce. And when we look at this, it kind of ties in to what you just said. And again, looking at it from the agent's perspective, if they're taking hard calls back to back, coming back to that point, when you say that, the team leaders, the planners, and they need to look at it not just as math, but also see what it's doing to agents, what would be your recommendation for, again, like contact center leaders or the planners who are actually working on this, to kind of identify that, what it's doing to the agents before it shows up as attrition?
No, that's a great question. And the answer is deceivingly simple. Right? And simple is different than easy. The answer is go talk to them. That's it. Right? As a contact center leader, talk to them. We know the numbers. We see what's happening. Our occupancy is spot on. It's exactly where we want it to be. How does it feel? And it asks for the emotional responses. Ask for them to dive in, not to, is it sustainable? Like, that's an interesting question, but I would rather talk about, like, how does it feel to be at this pace? The pace that you just were yesterday, that was really heavy. How did that feel? From our perspective, that looked heavy. Did that feel, no, you felt good? It just felt busy? Cool, maybe we can increase our occupancy. Or like yesterday was crazy slow. Oh, it was nice because you actually had a breath of fresh air and you slowed down. Okay, have the conversations, not to say, cool, based upon one particular person's perspective, we change everything, but it's the context that adds the flavor to the numbers. It adds additional perspective. And the more that we're talking, the more that we're ingesting those are additional variables for us to consider. It's not to say we have to change the metrics, but we better understand what the metrics are doing and producing, because the production of occupancy isn't just service level. It is the customer experience. It's NPS. It's also attrition. It's also employee engagement. So hopefully, when we're thinking about our math from a forecasting and scheduling perspective, we're branching out past what does it produce from a service level perspective and start considering what does it produce from attrition, from engagement, from customer experience. These are the other pieces that I honestly think is a responsibility of the WFM team. It's a responsibility of a good planner to consider those outputs.
That's an interesting take. And I mean, when you say that, I'm really intrigued to know also then what you think about what happens in the future. So we talk about, okay, yes, these things needs to change. We need to look at the metrics. We need to answer, okay, do these metrics still hold in the future? But it's also like when AI is then again coming into the picture, taking the easier tasks. And there's like lots of conversation around this as well, that, they're taking away our jobs there. And there's like this fear. And we always, from our perspective and from our research, we've always seen that, it's not necessarily that they're taking away jobs. Okay, maybe the contact centers will need fewer agents, but the ones that do remain, they would require to be highly skilled and more empathetic. And then we naturally think, how do contact centers respond to that? I mean, if these agents now need to be even more skilled than they were before, is there a specialized career path for them? Does the pay structure change? Or will also in the future, the agents be expected to do that equally as the agents are doing right now with the mix of easy and hard calls?
Such a good question. And I think my pessimism shows a little bit on this particular question, because I don't think the question is what will happen. What's my best guess as to like where we're going and what will this look like? And I'll own my perspective. My context is uniquely American. I'm on the state side, right? And so I think my perspective of business, of politics in the States is maybe a little bit different than in the EU and in different pieces of the world. So I'll own that up front. I think the patterns that I am seeing is it matches your perspective around easy stuff is going away. Hard stuff stays, requires additional level of knowledge and skills. Yes. I'm not confident in organizations willing to pay more for that. So my two thoughts on that is basically, if the easy stuff has gone away and it just requires a higher level of skill, is that not still an entry-level role? It's harder, but it's still just an entry-level role. And if it is an entry-level role, I think organizations that are being rewarded on the market for laying people off, not even about profitability, but just good job, you laid off 10% of your staff, we like you more from a stock market perspective, like that's their reward structure. Again, I'm getting a little pessimistic, I think, but if that's the reward signals that we're seeing, I have a hard time thinking someone's going to say, well, their job is harder, so we should probably pay them more. Unfortunately, I do think your path of simple stuff going away or easier, harder stuff stays, more people doing hard stuff sticks. I think when we kind of think about pay and career pathing, I think that's organization dependent, because I think it comes down to what is that organization trying to do. And the organizations that are trying to better their communities, better the lives of their employees, yes, they will probably pay more. They will think about career pathing differently. My today perspective, based upon like the American environment, I am pessimistic about greater pay or greater career advancement. Just a harder job, probably at the same pay level.
Makes sense. I mean, totally from the US side of things, especially, I think that kind of like, aligns with the current reality as well. At some point, it does kind of like bring in the angle of, agent well-being in there, and if they're being compensated enough for the tasks that they're doing. But I also see it from the organization's perspective, and then it's again at the end of the day, it's still handling customer queries. It's still the same job. So why there? But yeah, it's good to know your thoughts on that. And that leads me nicely to my final question, which is around capacity planning. What would be your recommendation for organizations now looking at long-term planning? Now, again, with AI in the mix and with it getting harder to predict, how much of workload will AI absorb in the future? And given the fact that the agents that they do retain in contact centers would be highly skilled, so of course recruiting them and retaining them is also very important. So a bad capacity call could become all the more expensive at that point. What would be your recommendation, like for contact centers looking to do capacity planning now? How do they do that for the future?
I think it is the same pattern that we've been doing, just expressed a little bit differently. So it's the same process. When I think of capacity planning, it's forecasting, but just a little further out. It's the same basic math, the same basic thought processes that we're going through. And it's the same muscle, which is, again, what's changing, how do we respond? And in the end, like, I'm sorry, WFM teams, planner teams, but like, we're guessing. Like, we feel confident in our guesses, but we're making big guesses. And I think the best thing that we can do when we're especially thinking about capacity planning way out there is making it obvious to everyone what we're guessing about. What are our variables? And what are our assumptions? Make them as transparent as possible, expose them when we're talking about them, and have the discussions so that way marketing or finance or HR or operations, whoever we're partnering with, can say, that doesn't quite look right. I know that that's what we've been doing, but over here, we've been thinking about doing this. And I think that variable, that assumption you have, I think it changes. That's the conversation that helps it improve and be more accurate, even in a complex AI environment. I think it's the same pattern. Conversations, collaboration, making the variables transparent. That being said, I do think we are introducing some new concepts into it around self-servicing of AI. I think I will call this out, not quite your question, but I think adjacent and helpful nonetheless. I think a lot of WFM teams are doing a disservice for themselves, or even just ops teams are doing a disservice to say, we have this big pie of all of the interactions, and self-service is going to take all of this. So all we're going to look at is this over here, the remaining pie. And I think that's the wrong way to think about it. We need to be looking at all of it, because that is the whole of all of our customer base that has to be taken care of. And these self-servicing, they are free from an agent resource perspective, but they're not free to the organization. There's real tokens being spent there. There is real cost being spent there. I think it's appropriate for the WFM team to be looking at it still holistically, to say, sure, what is the impact of self-service and how does it impact what's left over, and how is it driving HT, and how is that driving complexity, and how does that drive shrinkage? Yes. That's what we've been saying. But there's also the forecast out the AI cost. It's not free. What is that? And have those conversations to say, well, if a human handles it, it costs us X dollars, but if AI handles it, it costs us Y dollars. Well, AI is cheaper. Let's keep doing that. But also, what's the output and impact on a customer? If the self-service is actually generating more customer churn, that's a cost that we need to account for. And so I would encourage WFM and planners, as we're thinking about capacity, we're thinking about long-term forecasting, don't get stuck in the mindset of only focusing in on your human resources. Think about it holistically and think about, again, the complexity of it all. Look at the customer impact, look at the customer churn, the agent churn. These are outputs to our forecast accuracy, to our capacity planning. I would encourage everyone to just keep increasing the complexity of our models with the increase of AI, but how we talk, communicate, and work through the models don't change. that's transparency, that's communication, it's collaboration. I think those are still the foundations of good capacity planning.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you there. And I think what you also kind of mentioned goes into the realm of scenario planning, especially for the future. So when you say like be transparent, but also look at, what self-serve AI is costing, not in just terms of tokens, but also the customer experience side, and then be realistic about the plan that you have, and then have the final plan and then take it to the other departments and then kind of align on it. So I totally agree with you there. Thank you, Dan. This has been a really insightful conversation and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I appreciate the time. I'm glad that y'all are thinking about these things. I'm glad that you're asking the questions and you're engaging in conversation with the community. So thank you for having me. This was wonderful.